Hello and welcome friends. In Unit 3 in Indian economy, up till now we have talked about the public sector and the different public sector firms in India, and we also talked about the objectives which are basically behind setting up of public sector enterprises, the problems faced by them. We talked about the private sector and the categorization of private sector in India. We talked about the role of private sector and the limitations and the problems that they face. We have also talked about the cooperatives. We understood their meaning. We understood the different types of cooperative working in India, their role and problems. In the last session that we had, we talked about the small scale sector and we understood how small scale sector is categorized as far as the Indian economy is concerned. We understood about the old categorization, and then we understood that we have switched over to new categorization now. Now if you look at the small scale sector here in India, it plays a very important role in the Indian economy. First of all, it contributes 55% of the industrial production. So whatever industrial production takes place in India, 55% of that, which is more than half of the overall industrial production here in India, overall production in the manufacturing industries here in India, as well as the service industries here in India, takes place in the small scale sector. Secondly, please understand that large scale enterprises are limited to a few places, while small scale sector you would find presence across the country, and it helps in employment generation. It employs a lot of people. Why does it employ a lot of people? It employs much more than the number of people employed in the large scale industries. The reason is that in the last session also we had seen that they use outdated technology. Many a times they do not use machine and they rely more on the human labor, so it is more labor intensive. So to do the same kind of work, to produce the same number of output, they require more people because they rely less on machines. On the other hand, if you look at the large scale industries, they are generally reliant more on they are generally reliant more on the machines, and they are more capital intensive, while in case of small scale sector it is more labor intensive because it relies more on human labor. So the number of people employed in small scale sector is much more than the number of people employed in the large scale industries. Then please understand, as I said, the small scale sector would be found across the country, and to do their production they need to get raw material, and they source raw material from local market. They do not source raw material from faraway places. For example, Ashoka Leyland is a large scale firm, and if they want to source raw material, for example if they want to source tires, they would probably be doing it from Chennai, but that would not be the case with a small scale sector enterprise here in Pithoragarh. For example, if a small scale sector enterprise in Pithoragarh is producing juice from rhododendron, so they would be sourcing rhododendron from their local area only. If they are producing some other item, for example if they are producing jam, so for that they would be sourcing apples from the local market only. So in that sense, when they source raw material locally, they provide another avenue for revenue generation to those people or those enterprises who are producing this raw material in the local market. So in that sense they also help out the other industries. Now capital mobilization is another important role which is played by small scale sector in India. What do we mean by capital mobilization? Capital mobilization basically is whatever savings you have, you use it to start the venture, to start the small scale sector enterprise. So in that sense, the small scale sector mobilizes capital. So if 4 or 5 people have come together to start a small scale enterprise, they would pool in their resources, they would pool in their savings, whatever money they've saved, and then this money would be used to set up the enterprise. So this is what we mean by capital mobilization. So in that sense, the small scale sector helps mobilize capital, and it also helps the savings which are done by households, families in different parts of the country to be channeled into some productive use. So their savings are channeled into setting up the enterprise. So this is what we mean by productive use. Then it helps develop local entrepreneurship. As I said, it is spread across the country. So small families are indulged in small scale sector enterprises. So naturally entrepreneurial growth takes place at the local level. So it helps small time entrepreneurs come up. It helps these people set up their own business. So in that sense, it also develops local entrepreneurship. Right? Now please understand, now since number one, it is spread across the country, small scale sector would be found across the country. We have taken example of how an iron smith, Lohar, would be found across the country. So now naturally there would be equitable distribution of wealth. It would help in balanced regional growth. Not a particular region, but across the country, all the regions would grow because all the regions would be having small scale sector enterprise. This is not the case with large scale enterprise. In the case of large scale enterprise, they are generally to be found in only a few places. So they do not allow regional balance in economic development. For example, even in Uttarakhand you would find Haridwar and Rudapur only large scale enterprises are there. So in that sense, the hilly areas lag behind, but that is not the case with small scale enterprise. Small scale enterprise would also be found in these areas. So they lead to an equitable distribution of wealth across the regions in the country. And secondly, since many of these small scale enterprises are founded as partnership firms, the partners actually pool in their resources to set up these enterprises. So whatever the profit is, that is divided among these partners in proportion of their investment. So in that sense also it leads to equitable distribution of wealth. As I said, it stimulates growth of ancillary firms. Now what do we mean by this? Let me take example of a small scale enterprise here in Uttarakhand. Here in Pithoragarh you might have heard of the Kamdhenu dairy. Now what do? They basically source rhododendrons and then convert the rhododendrons into rhododendron juice, Bunas juice, and they sell it in the market. Now please understand what do we mean by ancillary firms. Now to sell the juice in the market, to package it, they need some plastic bottles, for example, right, or glass bottles. Now certainly they cannot manufacture these bottles on their own. So what would they do? They would source it from some other company. So there might be another company which might be coming up in Pithoragarh, which would be involved in producing glass bottles or plastic containers. So this is an example of an ancillary firm, right? So for example, many of the firms, they want cardboards so that they can package their goods. So a cardboard making industry also comes up, a cardboard making unit also comes up in the vicinity. So this is an example of an ancillary firm, and they help the growth in ancillary firms. Now since they provide employment also, they also help reduce rural to urban migration. You know that in Uttarakhand rural to urban migration is a big problem. People migrate to places like Delhi, Meerut, Bareilly, Lucknow in search of work. But small scale sector enterprises help in reducing this flow from rural to urban areas by generating employment at the local level. Fine. And if there's a lot of rural to urban migration, what will happen? First of all, there would be not many people left in rural areas. For example, in Uttarakhand there are some ghost villages where no families are left now because all of them have migrated in search of job or in search of better education and health facilities. And secondly, what might happen, it would create a lot of pressure on the infrastructure in the urban areas. So the urban areas would not have sufficient amount of dwellings, houses, where these people could be made to stay. The road network would be overburdened. The bus service might be overburdened in these urban areas. The sewer network might be overburdened. There would be a lot of congestion. So it is a good idea to somehow check this movement of people from rural to urban areas, and the small scale sector helps in doing that. As I said, it helps in balanced regional development also, and it also helps in 40% of our, it also contributes 40% of our export earnings. What do we mean by this? Small scale sector produces goods and it contributes 40% to our overall exports. So 40% of the items which are exported from India are basically manufactured in small scale sector enterprises. Now let us talk about the small scale sector, the various problems which are faced by this sector. Number one is shortage of credit. Many a times they do not have access to sufficient credit. Large scale industries can go to bank and they can get their credit sanctioned, get their loan sanctioned, but that is not the case with small scale sector enterprises. Many a times they are not well informed as to where to go, which particular bank or which particular non-banking financial company to contact, and many a times they are not credit worthy. They are not considered credit worthy by the banks and the financial institutes. The reason being that their level of operation, their scale of operation is much low. So there is perennial shortage of credit to these kind of enterprises. Then many a times they do not get raw material on time. This could be because the raw material is imported. Many a times they have to basically import the raw material. For example, if you go to Gujarat and if you go to Surat and if you go to Maharashtra, Mumbai, you would find that there are so many small scale sector enterprises which do what? They basically import uncut gems and then they polish them and then they export these polished gems. Fine. What do we mean by gems? Heere Javaharat. So they basically bring in diamonds which are uncut, raw diamonds, and then they polish them. Once the diamond is polished, then only it will be able to attract, it will have that glitter in it. So the polishing takes place there and then they export it. Fine. So many a times because of reasons, different reasons, there might be a scarcity of such raw materials. So I'm just giving you an example. So many of these small scale sector enterprises, they basically import such raw materials and then they process it or use it and then they sell the output. So many a times it could be that there is scarcity of such raw materials, or the raw material that they receive is of low quality, or these raw materials are not available in time. So because of these reasons, many a times their operations are impacted. Then small scale sector, many times the utilization of resources is also not optimum. Now what do we mean by this? Supposing that they have a small scale sector enterprises there which has a small shop from where it operates, supposing. Now please understand that this shop will remain open from, let's say, 7 a.m. in the morning till at most 9 or 10 p.m. in the evening. It would not be operating in the night. So in a way they are making use of the resources only for 18 hours or 16 hours. The remaining 7 to 8 hours they are keeping the resources idle. Fine, that does not happen with large scale enterprises. They would keep their machines running, the factories would remain open throughout the day. They would be working in 3 shifts of 8 hours each. So you would find that even during night the production is taking place. So they are optimally utilizing the resources, but in this case, the small scale sector unit which is operating from a shop which remains closed during the night, they are not utilizing the resources optimally. And please understand, they might be paying rent on a regular basis. So in a way, they might be paying rent, but despite this, they are using the as at the shop only for 18 hours in a day, not for 24 hours in a day. So this is another problem which ultimately reduces their efficiency, right? So it leads to reduced efficiency of operations. Then unreliable power supply. Large scale enterprises, many times they have their own source of power supply. Fine, they might be generating their own power, so they do not have to worry about the intermittent power supply, but that is not the case with small scale sector. Many times they have to worry because the power supply is not reliable, it is not there throughout the day, and if the power supply is not there, they have to close down the machines, the work suffers, the operations suffer, and ultimately their efficiency reduces. Many a times, as I said, small scale sector enterprises come up, they are founded when some people pool in their resources, and since they do not have sufficient access to credit also, so what will happen, they would not be able to invest a lot in the unit, in the enterprise. They would not be able to purchase the latest machinery, they would not be able to use the latest of the technologies because they only have limited amount of money available with them. They do not have access to credit, so naturally they would not be able to invest in improving the technology, improving the process in the small scale enterprises, in the small scale unit that they have. So this limited investment also becomes a problem, and that is why, because of limited investment, they are not able to spend on R&D, they are not able to spend on bringing up the most advanced technology. They still use the outdated technology, and because of use of outdated technology, what happens, the production which takes place, the goods that are produced, they are of inferior quality. Not only this, of variable quality also. Some good would be of good quality, the other goods which are produced would not be of that quality. So this might happen. Also, the production cost would be much higher. So these kind of things happen. And secondly, they also cannot rely on MIS because they do not have the resources to invest in an MIS, management information system, and they do not know as to which particular product is selling. They do not have timely information on how many items they have sold, how many items they have already stocked, what is the quantity of raw material available in the unit, how much they have to purchase. So they are not able to make these decisions because they do not have access to any management information system, any advanced management information system or computer-based management information system, because of which they are not able to make the correct decisions. For example, Maruti gets to know at the end of every day which particular brand of car is selling more and which particular color is selling more, so they can accordingly make changes in their production schedule the next day. But that is not the case with these small scale sector enterprises because they do not have sufficient money to invest in such management information system. Right? Again, there's dearth of skilled manpower. You may not be able to find good quality managers, good quality engineers in places like Pithoragarh who are ready to work with these small scale enterprises. They do not have sufficient marketing know-how, no, because they do not have access to skilled marketing managers. They are unable to have sufficient marketing know-how. They do not know how to satisfy the customer. They do not know whether the customer is happy or not with their product. They have no idea about the other new marketing innovations which have come up. So because of this, ultimately their sales suffer. And many a times, I'll discuss this point a little later. Now what will happen because of this? There would be customer dissatisfaction. Customer would be dissatisfaction. Moreover, you are charging him much more than the large scale enterprises would do. Why? Because you are producing the same item at a higher cost, so naturally you would keep your prices higher. So the customer has to pay more, but the customer is not satisfied because the quality might not be the same for all the items that he is producing, and some of the items that he is purchasing, some of the items that he is purchasing will also be of bad quality. So the customer would not be satisfied. The customer would not be satisfied, and since the customer is not satisfied, the customer would not want to return and would probably want to buy from some other company. So in that sense, they are not able to increase their market. Again, they also do not have sufficient people who know how to market the products. So ultimately their sales suffer. They are not able to corner. They are not able to have a large market share. Again, many a times they have to sell their products to large scale enterprises which are their customers. For example, they might be producing small packaging items which they might be selling to large scale enterprises. For example, in case of Nestle requires packaging material, so it could be some small scale sector enterprise which might be producing this raw material and selling to Nestle, but Nestle may not be able to pay them on time, may deliberately not pay them on time, because of which what will happen, their money would get blocked with their customer, in this particular case Nestle, and they would simply not have much money to invest in the next cycle of production. So this might happen. And again, what might happen, since Nestle would be buying in bulk, I'm taking the same example, Nestle would be asking for a bulk discount. So it may so happen that because of this lack of dominance in the market, because of being a very small player in the market, they may have to sell to Nestle at an unremunerative price. Why? Because if they do not sell to Nestle at low prices, what will happen? Some other competitor would be asked by Nestle to supply them the items. So because of this, they are forced to sell their products at the unremunerative prices, right? And many a times, as I said, they will have to sell on credit, which means udhar pe unko dena padega. Yani Nestle would be buying from them on credit, and many a times Nestle would deliberately delay the payment, and they would not have any option. But because for them Nestle is a big customer, and for them, if they do not try to satisfy Nestle or try to go by Nestle's terms, then they will have to lose their customer, in this case Nestle, to some other competitor. So they have no option but to relent whenever Nestle is putting up these kind of conditions. Fine. So this is another issue that the small scale sector enterprises have: bureaucratic apathy and multiple clearance. They have to apply for multiple clearances, and many times the bureaucratic machinery, the government machinery, is also not very considerate of their problems that they are facing or the challenges that they are facing. So they have to face these kind of problems. Now in the next unit that we'll move over to unit number 4, wherein we'll be discussing poverty and unemployment. Thank you very much.